There we go. All right. I had to bounce out and come back because I wanted to add a title. The title is, for what it's worth, Why I Am a Right Winger. Right. I know we hear the term right winger or left and right and left versus right and so on. And, a lot of folks, I don't think they really understand what those terms mean and why we should why we should embrace them because ideas matter, and by extension, words matter. So I want to talk about that briefly, but also I received a message from a friend of mine in response to my most recent YouTube upload regarding the Black Panther Party, right? And he made a statement to me initially. He said, "Well, Chuck, it's great information, man. I very enlightening, very intriguing, and everything else." And he asked me, he said, "Man, because if you've seen me in the past, or if you watched some of my YouTube videos, sometimes, I'll just break out in story. I'll just start, going off the cuff and just sort of saying things, right?" And he said, "Man, where do you get that from? Where do you get these? Where do you get these ideas from? These stories from? How do you find this information?" And so, I shared with him just how I go about doing my research, and where do I go to find some of these interesting nuggets. For example, I talked about the dynamic between Black Panther Party co-founders Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton. And I talked about how Seale revered Newton because of Newton's ability as a hand-to-hand fighter. Um, Legend has it that in the Oakland neighborhood that Huey P. Newton grew up in, the young boys in the neighborhood would oftentimes fight one another for recreation. They didn't always have boxing gloves, if ever, so they would wrap big like bath towels around their hands, and they would fight one another. Boys being boys, right? I mean, there was no personal animus, I suppose, for the most part. They were just passing the time. And everyone in the neighborhood sort of marveled at how quick Huey P. Newton's hands were. He was never the biggest guy, but he always had quick hands. Again, maybe if Huey would have focused his attention more so in that direction as opposed to being a so-called revolutionary, who knows, maybe he could have been a great prize fighter. We never know. We'll never know. And so he asked me, he said, "Man, where do you get these stories from? How do you find this stuff?" And I told him, I said, "Man, autobiographies, but they give you some of the best information, autobiographies and biographies, because a lot of the stuff that the interesting information that you get. Hey, what's up, Prudence? Some of the more interesting information that you get, comes by way of word of mouth or firsthand accounts of people who were there. If you watch the talk, I talked about. I read an excerpt from Elaine Brown's autobiography, A Taste for Power, where she details Huey P. Newton's reaction when she told him what she would do in order to clean up the crime scene, essentially, of the assault on Preston Callins. And again, only Elaine Brown and Huey were in the room. So unless you were one of them, how would you know that story? Well, read Elaine Brown's autobiography. But in light of that, it kind of and see, when I listened back to my last taping, I said, "Dang, Chuck, you really left a lot out there. You left a lot on the table, right?" Because I kind of have this kind of I'm a fan of sort of like the oral tradition. What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up? I kind of have again, I'm in the spirit of the sort of oral tradition where I just can kind of remember things, right? I was always one of those guys that always had a fairly decent memory, and then sometimes I just say things and it may sound like I'm sort of making things up or kind of just embellishing, but I just kind of remember things, and I don't always remember where I hear things, or I don't always remember where I get them from. But nevertheless, right, I like to sort of tell stories. But so I'm going to do a recap on the America's Viet Cong and the Politics of Murder that I uploaded on YouTube. I'm going to do a just a quick run through of some of the gaps that I left there. But before I do that, like the title says, why I am a right winger. I just felt the need to just sort of say this quickly, and hopefully I can explain this, within a snapshot. Even though it's kind of it's very weighty. It's a very heavy subject. You could probably write a 200, 300, 400 page book, maybe even on the difference between left and right, what it means, and where the concept originates from. I even talked about that even briefly, again, referring back to my most recent YouTube show, where I talked about the origins of the left-right divide, the origin of the left-right concept, right? Stems from the 1789 General Estate in France. And of course, that would eventually lead to the tragic events that would grip France over the next several years. The reign of terror of Robespierre and Antoine Saint-Just. But nevertheless, I want to talk about, and again, the reason I just brought that up is because when I was kind of going back and trying to decide what I would talk about and how I would fill in these gaps, I read over that statement when I was looking through my notes, and I said, let me expound upon this, because I don't really think people understand. The reason why I am a so-called, you know what, I'm not going to even qualify it anymore by saying a so-called right winger. Understand something. The left, and like I said, I'm going to try to explain this as best as I can. The left is its own self-contained thing. Look at it this way, right? I mean, look at the way we perceive the passage of, I don't necessarily want to say the passage of time, but we sort of view things. I mean, look at the way we read. We read from left to right. It appears that I'm going from right to left because you're looking into the camera, but we read things from left to right. So the left in the word itself connotes a sort of linear progression, right? And you'll hear the left oftentimes they love to come up with dichotomies, oftentimes false dichotomies. But in one of the false dichotomies that they have erected is this notion of a reactionary versus a revolutionary. Now the left, again, it's moving in a linear fashion. So the right, you can look at the so-called right as the punctuation mark on a sentence. The left is the beginning, and the left is always moving, in essence, from left to right. And so when you are an agent of progress, as the leading figureheads of any given left-wing movement at the time would suggest, when you're in lockstep, I suppose, with them, then that makes you a revolutionary as opposed to a reactionary, which means one who's trying to stop progress. There's a reactionary and there's a revolutionary, right? And so the right never has the benefit of defining itself on its own terms. Although it has, but we rarely ever listen, right? One time when I was having a conversation with my friend Layla Gray, you all know her as Propaganda Fluent on Instagram, we had a conversation on YouTube, and I explained it this way, that the right is the shadow. The left as this illuminating Luciferian light, the way it perceives of itself, it's casting this ray of enlightenment upon the thing that it is appraising or deconstructing. And the shadow that is cast as a result of the left shining its light upon the thing is what's called the so-called right. But the right is always created in response to whatever it is that the left is doing. And so the right, wherever it sort of finds itself, symbolically, again, marks the punctuation on a sentence. It's stability. It marks the end. It says, we shall not go any further. I'm going to quote, and I typed this quote out because I didn't want to miss a word. This quote is from a British Marxist named Eric Hobsbawm, and I think he encapsulates it beautifully when he describes the left. He describes the left as such. He says, if the left have to think more seriously about the new society, that does not make it any the less desirable or necessary, or the case against the present one any less compelling. Now, what is he saying? He's saying that if we are to think more seriously about the new society, that doesn't make it any less desirable. You see, the left is in the process constantly of negation from the one until it sort of reaches the state of nothingness in hopes that something is better over the horizon. They don't know what's there, but the fact, as they see it, of the injustice of the present system is just cause enough to long for that unknowing future. So even though we must call into question the acts of, say, Joseph Stalin and Mao Zedong and Pol Pot, and the list goes on and on and on, even though if we are forced to call into question their acts, that does not undermine the fact that we must always try, that we must always progress toward that unknowing end. And once again, given what we know, that still doesn't, with respect, undermine the validity of our criticism of the system as it exists in the present. So the goal of the right is to rescue politics from the realm of intellectual newspeak. A fellow buddy of mine on Instagram, you all know him as He Is Blanche. He did a 3-hour-long discussion, had a 3-hour-long breakdown yesterday. And part of his breakdown is he discussed this so-called Jim Crow law that's being implemented in Mississippi. I know you all are probably familiar with it. You probably heard of it. If you didn't catch Blanche's show, I suggest you should go and check it out. It's a good breakdown. But again, there is no Jim Crow involved in this Mississippi law. It's just not there. Again, more intellectual newspeak. Because to be on the right, or to be so-called right wing, is nothing more than a left wing pejorative. A pejorative used to sort of pigeonhole those who are opposed to their never ceasing march through history, again, as they see it, right? And so they call us fascists and reactionaries, and if you're white, you're, of course, they racist. If you're Christian, you're homophobic or Islamophobic and what have you. If you are a man who isn't ashamed of his masculinity, well, then you're sexist and what have you. And our common refrain, unfortunately, is to call them, I don't know, liberal, Marxist, communist. Okay. Fair enough. But again, the right begins wherever the left ends. In my bio, on my IG page, I have a quote in my bio, somewhat cryptic, but it's not, maybe not that much. You probably understood it if you read it. You probably got the gist of what I said. I said that something to the effect of, for knowledge merely reveals itself to those who are conscious enough to discover what he has already created. And of course, the he is capital. When I say he, of course, I mean God. because everything has already been sort of created in a sense. We just have to discover that which has already been created so that we as human beings can know how we ought to be in the world, right? Man creates ideology, but true understanding does not come by way of ideology, so to speak, or innovation or invention. When it comes to abstraction, it comes by way of discovery. It's sort of like the whole issue, even words like capitalism. Capitalism is a left-wing pejorative, right? It's ideology. It doesn't mean anything. Capitalism is not an economic system. It just is. It just is what it is, right? When, the Soviet Union and its deeds were assessed in retrospect, those who were still trying to offend the Marxian dream did not describe it as a true sort of a socialist Soviet republic. They viewed it as "quote unquote" state-run capitalism. It was still capitalism. It was just it was organized and directed by the state and its bureaucrats and what have you. But therein lies the problem, because capitalism, to use their term, suggests that you have ownership of, or you can have ownership of things outside your person, of course, but first and foremost, what you own from birth, or at least from the time that you decide to enter the market, is your labor. And you can negotiate the price of your labor, and you can determine whether or not you want to participate in the market. In many instances, given the amount of development that we take for granted in the West, a lot of folks can have their needs met even without making the choice to participate in the market. They can forever pledge to relinquish their labor. But nevertheless, you still run into the same thing over and over again, because labor represents what you do with your time. And your time, in essence, is your life. And no matter what, the left cannot take away, again, your time and your life, because when it's all said and done, someone is going to claim ownership of it. It's either the civil society or the state. You can't get around it. So there are certain things that are fundamental to the human experience. And so what we here on the right believe in is understanding human nature and having a system or a archipelago of systems that work as a means to mitigate or negotiate the terms of social relationships and customs. Right? Just go and read Federalist 10. How do we mitigate the potentially disastrous consequences of man's quest for power? Because it'll always exist. And this is something that the left refuses to heed, because they seek to abolish the very concept of power. It reminds me of something that Milton Friedman once famously said when he talked about how the left abhors greed, as if we were to get rid of the private sector or abolish what they refer to as capitalism, or if they talk about the greed of, say, corporations, Corporations, as Milton Friedman teaches us, is a collection of individuals. It is not the corporation that is greedy, it is man. So when you remove man from a corporation or a business and place him in government, Milton Friedman asks the question, does he become less greedy? Well, the answer, of course, is no. Absolutely. They just don't want you to run it. So I'm like, again, I just felt the need to sort of say that, don't abandon, because again, I hear people say it all the time, left wing, right wing, same bird, and this nonsense. And when people say that sort of thing, they actually have convinced themselves that they're actually saying something profound when they are being extremely hackneyed. There's nothing insightful in saying that. The truth by nature is divisive. You either have free will or you don't. If it's good enough for God, it's good enough for me, because God divided the darkness from the light. In the darkness he called night. In the light he called day. There's good and evil. There's right and wrong. There's righteousness. There's wickedness. Right? Even hell, before the Judeo-Christian creed came to define the West, even in classical Greece, men like Aristotle understood that man must sort of train himself, in a sense, to cling to his sense of virtue over vice. And that's how you mitigate the potentially disastrous consequences of being human. It is a duty and an obligation to abide by something that is transcendent and spiritual in nature. It cannot be political. So that's what makes us so-called right-wingers. And I'm not running away from the term, because like the left, I do not believe that by abolishing or surrendering the language or running away from it, that I can somehow change reality because I refuse to use the word. You cannot take away gender, male and female, by saying there is no such thing. Division is okay, because division gives you choice. Division enables you to make a moral act, because there is right and there is wrong. The right symbolizes an attitude and a sentiment that draws a hard line in the sand to protect that which we have inherited from complete and total destruction, coming by way of people who, by their own admission, to go back to the quote of Eric Hobsbawm, has no idea of what to replace it with. Right? It's the Tower of Babel, the Garden of Eden, same old soup, just reheated. Men trying to be God. Now, let me go back, y'all. If you haven't, and let me move on, not go back, I'm moving on. Do me a favor, guys. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, man. Check out my last talk on the Black Panther Party. It's a good one. I'm kind of going to give you guys, if you haven't seen it, I'm going to give you some spoilers here, because I just want to again fill some gaps, because there were some things that I left out. I quoted a man by the name of Amala Yefshatali. He is the founder and chairman of the African People's Socialist Movement here in America. That movement is also referred to as the Uhuru movement. I just wanted to tell you guys, if you're interested in doing some research into the Uhuru movement, I just wanted to tell you guys how to spell that. It's Uhuru. Again, that spelling is Uhuru, Uhuru. I also talked about the French eroticist named Jean Genet, who in 1970 came to the United States in an attempt to garner public support for the acquittal of the New Haven Seven. The New Haven Seven was a trial. The state of Connecticut versus 7 members of the Black Panther Party for the murder of a fellow Black Panther by the name of Alex Rackley. I gave a brief sort of breakdown of Jean Genet. I also, but I neglected when I gave a brief sort of biographical breakdown of Jean Genet. I talked about, you said, IG guys got you shadow banned. They probably do. When I talked about Jean Genet, I neglected to mention the fact that Jean Genet was a gay man. I'm not simply pointing out the fact that he's gay simply because he's gay. If you understand his work, and again how sexual liberation ties into the politics of the left. Again, I'm going to shamelessly plug myself because I'm on my platform. I also did a breakdown on communism and or homosexuality and communism, where I talk about that. But again, I just wanted to mention that Jean Genet is in fact, or was in fact, a homosexual, and so was another key figure in the another key figure of the New Left. I'm sure you all are familiar with him, and that is postmodernist philosopher Michel Foucault, another Frenchman who brought his brand of French literary criticism that we call postmodernism to the Americas. He and another Frenchman, Jacques Derrida. But Michel Foucault, of course, died from AIDS-related complications in 1984. So there's always this kind of weird, almost link, in a sense, between left-wing politics and sexual immorality, particularly homosexuality. And as we can see in today's world, it gets even deeper than that. I spoke too about the Symbionese Liberation Army, and I couldn't remember at the time. Of course, the woman's name is it's popular situation that took place. Of course, was the so-called kidnapping of Patty Hearst. I couldn't remember what the woman's name was. I said the Symbionese Liberation Army, they kidnapped somebody. I can't remember who it was, but of course that was Patty Hearst. And she became a co-conspirator. She claimed that she was participating against her will because they had raped and beat her and what have you. But that was proven to be false. The whole thing was a sham. She was a witting and willing participant in their crimes, and she was sentenced to 35 years in prison, which was eventually reduced to just 7 years. And I don't even think she served out her entire 7 years. Her sentence was in fact commuted by Jimmy Carter, and she was later given a full pardon by Bill Clinton. If you look at, say, Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, they are very keen on pardoning terrorists and Marxist communists. I just wanted to talk about, Patty Hearst, because I couldn't remember her name. And again, what sort of precipitated the downfall of the Symbionese Liberation Army was the incident that I made reference to in my YouTube video, which was the killing of the black superintendent of schools, whose name I could not remember at the time, which is why I'm circling back. The Symbionese Liberation Army killed a black man by the name of Marcus Foster. Marcus Foster. Right. You're right, bro. Or, yeah, looks like you look like by the avatar. I don't mean, if you are a woman, I don't mean to insult you by calling you bruh, but you're like a man. Yeah, so I said that the Symbionese Liberation Army took credit for the assassination of Marcus Foster. And when they sent out this letter, I said that the letter was sent to the press. I believe the letter was originally sent to his wife or widow after his death, Jacqueline Foster, and this letter was printed in the papers. And I just wanted to read briefly the letter that was sent to Jacqueline Foster, the widow of Marcus Foster, the black superintendent of schools. I'm going to read this letter. It said that I am not a member of any political organization. I am a street sister. I have, however, as the case of other black people, felt the direct oppression of the establishment. I am taking this time to try to give you comfort by trying to help you understand the factual circumstances surrounding your husband's death. Please carefully weigh the following. Your husband was in the Marines. The Marine Corps is a voluntary thing. They are also the most highly trained professional killers in the armed forces. Your husband came home from Vietnam to join another voluntary thing. The most ironic, similarly, is the fact that still he fought on the wrong side. If you look into it, you will see that a policeman's only purpose is to, number one, jail, and number two, kill. Now, are those the only two purposes of the police, is to jail and kill? Okay. He is here to carry out the laws of a racist, capitalistic establishment that is impossible for black people to live within. You see, Mrs. Foster, your husband was a fascist. Fascism, they define as the open, terroristic dictatorship of the most racist, reactionary, there's that word, imperialistic element of the establishment. And it says the people's definition. So that's how the people define what fascism is. Interesting. I know you feel that your husband was different because he was black, but so were some of the pigs who shot Fred Hampton and Mark Clark and attacked Eldridge Cleaver, killing Bobby Hutton. What's up, DeReal? So there's the, now can you imagine your husband was just murdered by the Symbionese Liberation Army, whose members were predominantly white. As a matter of fact, I think the only black member was their so-called leader. Forget his name. DeFries. John DeFries, Ron DeFries, or something like that. Anyway, could you imagine receiving this letter after finding out, or after your husband was just murdered? This is the letter you receive in the mail. Okay. I saw in a picture how you clutched the American flag, and they, of course, spell America with 3 Ks. American flag to your heart and cried. I felt so deeply sorry for you because you didn't even realize that what you were embracing was the reason your husband is dead. Your husband let that flag put him in a position that no black man should be able to relate to. A position, however, that he chose, to be a Marine and to be the superintendent of schools in the city of Oakland. To be the official paid assassin flunky of Nixon, Rockefeller, Lindsay, and Murphy, who have already shown the people that they are outright pigs. I didn't even want to read it all, but I'll continue to the end. We as a people cannot tolerate this madness, and all flunkies of this establishment must be dealt with by the armed forces of the people. The people force is the foundation of the establishment's oppression of black people. Destroying that foundation is key to building a government black people can live within. And it will happen, and black people will live within it easily because it will be a people's government. It will be for the people because it will be set up by the people. I hope I have been effective in explaining to you that the death of your husband and his partner was not a tragedy. It was indeed a victory for the people. Destro, what's happening? So that is the letter received, that Jacqueline Foster received, sort of giving an explanation for why her husband, Marcus Foster, was murdered by the Symbionese Liberation Army. Again, this would pretty much precipitate the downfall of the Symbionese Liberation Army, because even those on the left could not support this brazen act, this assassination, and they were roundly condemned even by their fellow radicals. And of course, the Symbionese Liberation Army was a product of the Berkeley area of California, the home of not the free speech movement, but what I refer to as the reemergence of the American Communist Movement. Berkeley, California. San Francisco, Oakland Bay Area became the key or the central point of American communism in the 1960s. So that's the letter. And I think, again, I think the Simeonese Liberation Army, I believe, if memory serves me correctly, but I could be wrong, don't quote me, I believe that they are the ones responsible for this letter. I believe they typed this out and sent this to the widow of Marcus Foster. Angela Davis. I talked about Angela Davis. You saw me. I went in talking about her. There are a couple of things that I did mention and a couple of things that I neglected to mention. I talked about Angela Davis and her affinity and embrace of Jim Jones of the People's Temple. I want to read something. This here is a statement that Angela Davis remarked to Jim Jones and his commune, members of his commune in Guyana in 1977. This was just a few months prior to the tragic event that led to the death of nearly 1,000 American citizens. People commonly refer to it as a mass suicide or act of revolutionary suicide, to quote the title of Huey P. Newton's autobiography. And of course, Jim Jones would, they so-called rehearsed this, and he would stress that, he would much rather kill himself to live under the dictates of an imperialist regime and what have you. Because a lot of people, of course, don't realize that Jim Jones was no religious man. He was no preacher in the Orthodox sense. He was a pastor, of course, for social justice, and we all know what that means. He even left behind his holdings. He willed his assets to the Soviet Union. Here is Angela Davis's remarks to Jim Jones and his commune. She says, and remember, they would play, they would broadcast messages over this sort of loudspeaker in Guyana. This is 1977. This is Angela Davis. I would like to say to my friend Jim Jones and all my sisters and brothers from the People's Temple who are in Guyana there, know that there are people here, not only in the San Francisco Bay Area, but across the country who are supporting you, who are with you. I can personally speak to that National Alliance Against Racism, that was a group, and political oppression in cities throughout the country, from Birmingham, Alabama to, and it was inaudible, didn't know what she said there, that there are people who are aware of the contribution of People's Temple to our efforts to, for example, free Reverend Ben Chavis and the Wilmington 10. We know that you have participated and brought people to all the marches and demonstrations, and thousands of petitions that have been sent to government officials have been circulated and signed by members of People's Temple. And so we are very deeply obligated to you for what you have done to further the fight for justice, to further the struggle against oppression, to further the fight against racism. I know you are in a very difficult situation right now, and there is a conspiracy, a very profound conspiracy designed to destroy the contributions which you have made to our struggle. And this is why I must tell you that we feel that we are under attack as well. When you are attacked, it is because of your progressive stand. And we feel that it is directly an attack against us as well. Therefore, more of us need to know that we will be carrying on this idea, that we will do anything in our power to ensure your safety and your ability to keep on struggling. And in response, there were a loud eruption of cheers when members of Jones's congregation, so-called, heard this. I attempted to say, though not very eloquently, that we are with you and we appreciate everything you have done, and we know you are going to win. And in the final analysis, we are going to win. Yeah, I wonder if Henry Louis Gates Jr. even thought about asking Angela Davis how she feels about these words, or if she regrets um, her open support for Jim Jones. I suspect not, considering the fact that to this day she is an unrepentant communist who, of course, endorsed Joe Biden for president in 2020. And of course, at this time, Jim Jones, he had a ton of friends in high places politically. A lot of so-called progressive Democrats in the state of California, most notably Harvey Milk. But I think I'll move on. I think you all get the point. And yeah, Angela Davis. I also made a reference to George Jackson in my talk. I didn't go into deep detail about George Jackson in the interest of time, but Angela Davis was also once upon a time a lover of George Jackson, the so-called dragon philosopher of the Black Panther Party. Even the rift between Cleaver and Newton, which I detailed, was also due in part to many Panther members suspecting that it was Huey P. Newton that sort of sabotaged George Jackson's failed prison break. They blamed Huey P. Newton for the death of George Jackson. And this is why a lot of Panthers were beginning to turn their backs on Newton. And I also, of course, talked about the suicide of Faye Stender, who was George Jackson's attorney and lover. But I neglected to mention the fact that I talked about how George Jackson put a hit out on her. She was shot, but she wasn't killed. She was just left paralyzed. She was shot in the form of a crucifix under the orders of George Jackson. Why? Because she refused to sneak firearms into the prison for George Jackson. And Faye Stender, of course, she was a radical lawyer, and she kind of abandoned. She was never the same after that, but she never really spoke out about what happened to her and about how she knew George Jackson was a bad man. But she didn't, she learned after the fact, because she was gullible and naive and thought, of course, that that black men, particularly black men who spout Marxism, are not just depraved, wicked, evil, seditious criminals, that these are in fact politically oppressed minorities. She actually believed this, and it cost her her life. Of course, she crossed the line between personal and business, and she began to again have a sexual relationship with George Jackson. But when she refused to help him escape from prison, he tried to have her murdered. And she never spoke about this because she thought that it would again undermine the revolution. The same thing when I spoke about, I also spoke about David Hilliard, another prominent member of the Black Panther Party, who wrote an autobiography that was published in 1994. I forgot what the title of David Hilliard's biography was, but he was another one. He was accused of rape by a female staffer for Ramparts, who was acting as a translator because she spoke French for Jean Genet in the 1970s, and she disclosed to someone close to her that David Hilliard raped her at the home of Hollywood actor Donald Sutherland. And the reason why she never went to police was because she, for the same reason that Faye Stender kept her mouth shut, was, for one, due to fear, but most importantly, because even after these events, they were still dedicated to the cause, and she thought it better to keep the incident to herself than to sully the reputation of the Black Panther Party. Now, moving on, y'all. I'm almost done, y'all. I just wanted to just fill in some gaps because I left a lot on the table, again, because I was just kind of freestyling. So I talked about Ronald Reagan, right? talked about how Ronald Reagan's experience in Hollywood in the 40s and 50s changed his political outlook, and he became one of the 1950s neocons, right? You know, we hear the term neocon today, but the term neocon is as old as the 1950s, because these were former FDR Democrats who had become conservative due to the Democrat Party's softening towards the Soviet Union during the Cold War, and Ronald Reagan was one of these men. I should have mentioned, and I didn't, that Ronald Reagan was the president of the Screen Actors Guild from 1947 to 1952. And this really, because I said that Reagan found out what was going on as far as communist infiltration in the United States because he was a part of that Hollywood milieu, but also he knew firsthand that the Communist Party was trying to take over the Screen Actors Guild. And perhaps they did, but Reagan, I guess he got out of there just in time. But Ronald Reagan, for a brief period of time, was himself a so-called, or I would say, a dupe for the Communist Party, because he was being fed talking points from their saboteurs and apparatchiks. And so Ronald Reagan talked about, and of course Ronald Reagan would testify before the House Committee on Un-American Activities as a, I guess, for a witness, if I could, yeah, I guess that's the best way I could describe it, as a witness for the state, so to speak, to the fact that there were, in fact, communists throughout Hollywood. And he knew that because he had saw it. And he knew that communists were feeding their talking points to these performers and entertainers, and telling them what to say. Whenever they would speak publicly or at an award show or this place or that place, they were being told what to say. And they were given talking points from the Communist Party. And Ronald Reagan said, nah, you're not going to do this. Not on my watch, not while I'm here. He bought into it for a minute, but then he saw what the communists were really up to. So I just wanted to mention that Reagan was, he was the president of the Screen Actors Guild. And I said that I made reference to, I hear a lot about this Razor Fist guy, man, Felix, but I know he's a popular YouTuber, you know what I'm saying? I know exactly who he is. And for some strange reason, bro, I just never watched any of his videos, but I'm going to, though. I learned about him, because I be watching my boys, Gary over at Nerdrotic and a couple of them other guys, and they put me on to Razor Fist, but I haven't went over there and checked this stuff out, but I will. Because I've seen some bits and clips and stuff like that in Razor Fist. Some of the things that I've heard him say was right on point. But I talked about Humphrey Bogart. I mentioned him. And I talked about that Humphrey Bogart was brought under suspicion due to the testimony of a man, and I couldn't remember his name. Again, y'all, I'm sorry, because I just be going off the dome telling stories. The man in question who sort of blew the lid on the communists in Hollywood was a man by the name of John Leach, John L. Leach. John L. Leach, he and his wife were both ex-communists who broke away from the party and testified to the California legislature, and I believe later on they would testify before the Dies Committee. Now let me say, the Dies Committee was named after Texas Democrat Martin Dies. You see, a lot of people, they talk about communism and this, that, and third, and they always talk about Joe McCarthy and how bad it was, and how McCarthyism, McCarthy is sort of like the figurehead of the sort of red under every bed scare of the 1940s, 1950s. But the House Committee on Un-American Activities was led by the Democrat Party, not Joe McCarthy. Again, Martin Dies was a Democrat. And so, again, there was sort of anti-communist fervor in both political camps at the time. This was not a Republican-led thing. It was bipartisan. But Anyway, John L. Leach would testify before the Dice Committee, and he dropped names like Humphrey Bogart and James Cagney and some others. I mentioned Lucille Ball. Lucille Ball was a member of the Communist Party. And when it comes to Lucille Ball, this isn't mere speculation. We know that Lucille Ball was a member of the Communist Party because she admitted as much when she, in fact, came out in support of Dwight Eisenhower publicly. She stated that she had pretty much joined the Communist Party out of as a result of the pressure that she was under from her family to join, but she claimed that she was never really passionate about their cause. She just sort of did it because, peer pressure. She thought that was the cool thing to do, was to be a communist, and so she joined the party. But she later on denounced the party and came out publicly to disclose her support for Dwight Eisenhower, and I guess openly state that she in fact voted for Dwight Eisenhower in '54. But anyway, so there's just a few names, and again, Martin Dies exonerated James Cagney and Humphrey Bogart and some others. But I'm gonna tell you something. I don't have time to get into it here because I didn't even want to be on IG Live that long, guys. I just kind of wanted to be brief. But if you break down and you listen to John L. Leach's claims and you really investigate it, look, presumption of innocence is a wonderful thing, and due process is a wonderful thing. Going back to what I said when I started off explaining, why I embraced the term right winger and why I denounced this notion of a left wing, right wing, same bird kind of stuff. Why I reject that. Because part of what makes us so-called, or again, I'm gonna stop saying the word so-called right wingers or conservatives, is because we believe in a sort of consensus of process. We may not get everything right, or we may not get it right all of the time, but the best we can hope for is a consensus of process. Now, again, going back to Bogart, it was never definitively proven, but there are some very, very eerie coincidences that are too coincidental to be merely circumstantial, if you know what I mean. Bogart would testify before Congress on behalf of a group called the Committee for the First Amendment. And this is a thing that communists, going back to Lenin, when he talked about useful idiots, Marxists would always, like deer ticks, they would attach themselves to, liberals and progressives, or they would use liberals and progressives to sort of inculcate or sort of protect themselves, to provide that barrier between themselves and sort of righteous criticism. Because so-called liberals would defend communists on the basis of, again, defending their civil liberties and whatnot, right? And so the whole trying to find out what was going on in Hollywood and stuff, this was not a free speech issue. This was an espionage issue, because those fellow travelers in the United States were loyal to a foreign adversary. It reminds me of what, thanks, brother. It reminds me of what Paul Robeson said, that, incensed men like Sugar Ray Robinson. Sugar Ray Robinson, of course, I believe Sugar Ray Robinson fought in World War II. I know he did serve at some point. Sugar Ray Robinson tried to talk Muhammad Ali into serving. Legend has it, but Muhammad Ali, Muhammad Ali began to second guess his refusal to join the military But he disclosed allegedly, because they think they were the only two that were there, that he disclosed to Jackie Robinson that he was afraid. He was afraid not to sort of maintain his stance against the Vietnam War, because he was afraid of what the Nation of Islam may do to him. But Sugar Ray Robinson, did I say Jackie Robinson? Sugar Ray Robinson, right? The two boxers. Because I'm thinking of Jackie Robinson because he served as well. You see that famous picture with him and Joe Louis in the army together. I like that picture. But Sugar Ray Robinson publicly said that if I ever saw Paul Robeson in person, I'm going to punch him in the mouth. Because Paul Robeson came out and said that if war were to break out between the United States and Soviet Russia, that no black people would take up arms, that black people would not fight for this country if a hot war broke out between the United States and the Soviet Union. And so the whole push to try and dig up under every rock in order to find communists, this was not an issue of being a part of whatever political party you wanted to be a part of, or believing in whatever political ideology you want to believe in. That was never the case, and this was made clear. The issue was, of course, that you were operating in the United States on behalf of a foreign power, because that is the pledge that you took when you became a member of the Communist Party. You took your dictates from the Soviet Comintern. And of course, the main and primary go-between between the American Communist Party and Soviet Russia was the Soviet sort of liaison by the name of Gregory Zinoviev. So the Communist Party in the United States was an organ of the Kremlin. This is why it was important to figure out where the communists were. We know that the communist Chinese are all up and through this damn country, and it doesn't seem like our elected representatives give two shits. They used to. But that's what that was all about. It wasn't about stamping out free speech. That was a lie. Perhaps the liberals, in their stupidity and cowardice, didn't know what was going on. But the communists who were hiding amongst them, they knew. And so they came up with this thing called the Committee for the First Amendment, the right to free speech. And Humphrey Bogart and Lucille Ball were members of this committee. And this committee was a communist front group. Humphrey Bogart would come out publicly and renounce this committee when he found out how many of his friends and folk that he had collaborated with in Hollywood, both in front and behind the camera, were in fact communist. He was mad about it. And maybe he was. Hey, I don't know. Was Humphrey Bogart a communist? I don't know. Again, research the claims of John L. Leach. But Humphrey Bogart would get, he said, I can't believe you all sent me there under the guise of free speech, knowing damn well you were a communist the whole time, because many of them who went before the House Committee on Un-American Activities, a lot of them got exposed. We had ID numbers, we had, the United States government had it all, exposed them. Of course, if you were a member of the Communist Party and you knew that the United States government had you dead to rights, you just pled the fifth. I plead the fifth. I'd rather not say. And Humphrey Bogart was like, whoa, wait a minute. He acted like he was shocked that he didn't know what was going on. And he soon left the committee when he too found out that he was being used. But I'm gonna give you a list of other Hollywood luminaries who were either card-carrying members or fellow travelers. I'll just name a few more. Kathy Hepburn, Catherine or Kathy short for Catherine, but I wrote it down, Katherine Hepburn, Judy Garland, Lena Horne, Gene Kelly, Gregory Peck, James Cagney, I mentioned him, and Charlie Chaplin. Now, Charlie Chaplin, this is not mere suspicion. Charlie Chaplin was, he was red to and through, not Republican red, but Soviet red to and through. Yes, that Charlie Chaplin was a communist. along with, other writers. I forgot his name. I'm sure you all may have read this book in high school. I know it was required reading for me in high school, The Crucible. Remember the novel, The Crucible? The man who wrote that novel was a communist. He would later admit this. And it was based upon the witch hunts, the witch trials, but it was meant to act as an allegory to the modern day sort of witch hunting of communists in America. The witches were allegories of American communists. Richard Wright, the black novelist, was a communist. So was Langston Hughes, and so was Ernest Hemingway. So, just to name a few. But yeah, it's deeper than you all think. And I'm almost done. I'm gonna let y'all go in a second. So, I talked about in my other talk about how an incident that led to the founding of the Black Panther Party was a situation. It was the street that they were on. It was a street called Telegraph Avenue when Seal and Newton were accosted by police and eventually arrested. I talked about the poetry that Seal was on a sidewalk reciting poetry, and the names of those poets and the poems, the name of the poems and the poets' names are as such. This incident took place on a Thursday on March 17th in 1966. It was a fellow Merritt College student because Huey and Seal were attending Merritt College at the time. Fellow Merritt College student Marvin Jackman. This is the name of the man who wrote this poem. Marvin Jackman. He oftentimes went by the pen name Marvin X. So that's how he would title or sign his poems, Marvin X. This poem was about the 1965 Watts riots, and the title of the poem was Burn, Baby, Burn. The poem reads, tired, sick and tired of being sick and tired. Motherfuck the police, Parker's sister too. I don't know who Parker is, but he's saying motherfuck Parker's sister. Burn, baby, burn. In time they will burn. Now, again, the story goes that Seal was so he was so boisterous, and so Bobby Seal was his presence was very, he commanded your attention when he spoke. If you ever watch Bobby Seal or just pull up some interviews to listen to him speak, he has a presence about him. And here's this man, broad daylight, walking down the street in the Berkeley area, and here he is reciting poetry. And the police came and tried to arrest him for being a public nuisance. And these were the kinds of things that he was saying. And I'm not saying that he shouldn't have the right to stand there and yell and scream in the middle of the street and recite poetry if he likes. But nevertheless, it's what he did. Another poem that he recited was written by a poet named Ronald Stone, and this was an anti-Vietnam War poem titled Uncle Sammy, Call Me Full of Lucifer. Uncle Sammy, call me full of Lucifer. I don't know. I'm poetry, not my thing, guys. I don't get it. I don't understand it. I don't know. Maybe it's because, just the standard of art across the board has just really, really plummeted. These modern day poets, are completely and utter trash. Especially back in the 1960s when you had all this political and revolutionary art. It's just pure trash. So here's part of the poem, Uncle Sammy, Call Me Full of Lucifer. Uncle Sammy, don't shuck and jive me. You school my naive heart to sing red, white, and blue stars and stripes. So stuff like that. So that's some of the poetry that Bobby Seal was reciting the day when he and Newton were arrested. Now, I did too when I talked about the death of Bobby Hutton. I said that the standoff. I don't know. Sometimes when I'm saying things and I'm reciting and I'm reading my notes, sometimes my brain gets ahead of my speech because I'm just so anxious and I'm so excited. And sometimes I'll say something that's not on the page, or I read it incorrectly or say it incorrectly and I don't notice it. But yeah, the standoff between cops and Cleaver and Hutton lasted for approximately 90 minutes. I said 9 minutes on my show. I don't know why I said 9 minutes. You're welcome, man. You're welcome, no problem. But yeah, it was 90 minutes. I don't know why I said nine, but yeah, it was nearly two hour long, an hour and a half long standoff before Bobby Hutton would surrender. The story goes, and he would trip, and once he tripped and his hands went down, that's when they claimed police shot. But whether you believe that or not, the truth of the matter is that Eldridge Cleaver would later admit to investigative journalist Kate Coleman in 1980 that he instigated the confrontation with police by deliberately ambushing them, and he did so in revenge, or in an act of revenge for the assassination of MLK. Cleaver would admit this almost 20 years later. And lastly, I talked about the Mark Essex event at the Howard Johnson's Hotel in downtown Louisiana. Mark Essex, a black radical nationalist, member of the Black Panther Party, shot several civilians and police officers while he commandeered a hotel called the Howard Johnson's in New Orleans, Louisiana. I think it's in New Orleans. Yeah, I think it. Yeah, I believe it is, or it was. It's just shut down now. Don't know how long it's been shut down, but I think it's the Howard Johnson is shut down now. But I talked about a man. There was a 19-year-old cadet Harold, who was shot on December 31st in 1972, and the rest of Mark Essex's victims were shot on January 7th, 1973. Right, it's a week later. And I was kind of puzzled by the discrepancy in those death dates, because I was certain that Cadet Harold was a victim of Mark Essex. Well, the reason being is because Harold was the original victim. There were two instances that took place. This was a huge ordeal standoff that occurred over several days, and Cadet Harold was shot on the 31st, and the other victims of Mark Essex were murdered on the 7th. Same perpetrator, just different days. I don't know why I was under the impression that the event occurred over the span of a day or two, but I guess it happened in two separate instances across several days. And so that's all I have for y'all, man. I just wanted to kind of get on here. I haven't done an IG live in a long time. Like I said, I'm going to put this up on my IG page, probably put it on YouTube as well. Thanks, man. I don't know when I'll be back, or what my next talk will be. You know, guys, I'm just a guy. I have family. I'm a father to four and a husband, and I work two jobs. I actually got off my part-time gig and came right home to do this. And I'm going to take an hour-long nap. I would normally be asleep right now before I start my second job. So I'm working like 13, 14-hour days from Monday through Friday. I only say that to say that I wish that I could do this just every day and just, but I don't, I just don't have the time, guys. And unfortunately, social media doesn't pay the bills. Not for me. I don't know how these other guys and gals, I don't know how they spend so much time making content. Again, they must be, because it does pay. Again, it just ain't paying me, y'all. So I don't know when you'll see me on YouTube or Instagram again. I'll probably go live with Shadow Jackson. We'll probably do something soon. But yeah, God, I love you guys, and trying to think, is there anything else that I wanted to say? You too, you as well. Did I cover all my bases? Yeah, I think I did. So you guys have a blessed evening or a blessed day or whatever, and I will see you soon. Peace.